I confess I'm a reformed drunk on this subject. I was one of just 2 sitting members of the California Assembly to endorse legislative term limits in 1990. They set a 6-year limit on the Assembly, and I supported them for the same reasons we've heard from the advocates today. I genuinely thought it would encourage more goal-oriented membership who are more skeptical of the bureaucracy and were more independent from legislative leaders. I won all of my debates just by saying, whatever the opposition says, just take a look at the California state legislature and tell me, could things possibly get any worse? And we all laughed and we all voted for term limits, and as karma would have it, I left the Assembly in 1992 when the term limits had had no practical effect yet on the membership, and I returned 4 years later when they had had complete and total effect. And the differences that I observed were absolutely jarring. They achieved the opposite of their intended effect. Instead of arriving in the legislature contemplating their political mortality, members simply arrived contemplating their next political move. They had no experience in state government, so they were far more dependent on the bureaucracy. And since their terms were limited, they were far more dependent on the leadership to assist in their next political move. Prior to term limits, members on the committees often had more experience with the subject matter than the bureaucrats who were appearing before them. A term limit stripped the legislative branch of this advantage, and it shifted enormous influence from the elected legislature to the unelected professional bureaucracy. Before term limits, there was a sense of loyalty to the institution and the process. Term limits destroyed all of that. Before term limits, the Assembly had leaders with experience that was commensurate to the Senate, and the Houses were fairly evenly balanced in terms of their influence. The leaders of the Assembly had equal or greater experience as their Senate counterparts, but after term limits, the Senate became the dominant House because that's where all of the experience accumulated. Some say the founders envisioned citizen politicians and term limits will restore that vision. Well, the founders served in many different offices and walks of life, but they were very serious politicians. George Washington won his first political office to the Virginia House of Burgesses at age 26. He left the presidency at 65. That's a career that spanned 39 years. John Adams was first elected as selectman of the town of Braintree, Massachusetts at age 31. He left the presidency in 1801 at age 66. That career spanned 35 years. Thomas Jefferson was 26 when he was first elected to the Virginia House of Burgesses. He left the presidency in 1809 at the age of 64, 38 years. James Madison, first elected to the Virginia legislature when he was 25, left the presidency in 1817 at the age of 66, 41 years. Abraham Lincoln was 25 when he was first elected to the Illinois House of Representatives after he lost his first bid at age 23. He left the presidency at 1865 at age 56, total career 31 years. So I pose this question. Would the country have been better off if we had curtailed these professional politicians just when they were acquiring the wisdom and judgment and experience to guide our nation through times of strife and peril? Term limit advocates dwell on the advantages of incumbency. Incumbents do have an advantage over challengers because they've already been through the vetting process with their constituents. They've generally acquired a greater experience in the subjects that they've dealt with, and they've built a record that people can judge. The founders did limit terms in a way. They limited the House to 2-year terms to assure that by definition, the House was constantly representative of the people. And I'd argue those are all good things that we should encourage. If my conservative colleagues, who mistakenly believe that term limits will improve the legislative branch, please look to states like California that succumbed to that siren song and ask yourself if you really want to send the Congress in that direction. Please look to the debate over this very issue at the Constitutional Convention and understand the reason these wise men rejected the idea. They did so, according to Madison's notes, principally for the reason the ranking member mentioned, that as term limits approached, they were afraid members would consider less and less the public interest and more their own. That's just human nature. In short, we have based our entire form of government on the assumption that more than half the people are right more than half of the time. That's a sound assumption. Let's stick to it and let us trust the people.